The first drop hit the valley floor at dusk, and it burned. I was standing on Ashenvale's high rampart when it began, not rain in any sense I had known, but a slow, white mist that fell with the weight of rain and smelled of iron, and turned the fir trees below me the color of ash within minutes. The pale fall. I had heard the old keeper speak of it, a storm that came once in a generation when the moon was wounded and her light bled into the clouds, turning every drop that fell from the sky into something the living could not endure. The bark peeled from the trees. The grass went gray. A hawk that flew into the edge of the mist came down in the valley below the keep in silence, its wings no longer moving. My gate warden Torvel crossed the rampart at a run. "Sealed," he said before I could ask. "Inner yard, stables, the lower corridor, nothing open to the sky." I nodded. Ashenvale Keep was built for exactly this, for the North's worst moods. Its stone was 3 feet thick, its shutters iron-banded, and in the 3 years since I had shut its gates against the world, I had kept it in a readiness that had nothing to do with war and everything to do with habit. When you have nothing left you wish to lose, you maintain what you have very carefully. "My lord," Torval's voice changed, "there is a woman at the outer gate." I looked down from the rampart. Through the pale mist I could see the gate torches still burning. We had not yet lost the outer yard, and at the heavy iron door I could see a figure, small, dark-cloaked and soaked entirely through, standing upright by sheer determination as far as I could judge. She came on foot. Her horse bolted when the fall began. She was on the mountain road from Fenwick Market. "My lord, she has perhaps 10 minutes before the mist reaches the outer arch." I did not deliberate long. Whatever I had become in 3 years of silence and sealed gates, I had not become a man who left a person to die in a moonstorm because he preferred not to be troubled. "Open the gate," I said. "Bring her through the inner yard at speed and seal it behind her." I was already moving off the rampart before Torval finished his acknowledgment. I met her in the entrance corridor, dripping on the flagstones, her dark cloak so soaked it had gone nearly black. She was perhaps 25, slight but straight-backed, with her dark hair plastered to her face and her jaw set in the particular way of someone who has just survived something and will not admit how frightening it was. She smelled of rain and pine bark and something else, something green and living, like a high mountain meadow after a summer storm, entirely out of place in the stone cold of my corridor. She looked at me without flinching. A great many people flinched when they looked at me directly for the first time. The Alpha King of Ashenvale, the cold northern lord who had closed his gates and buried his grief and barely left his own walls in 3 years. I was told I had become something of a ghost story in the villages below the mountain. She did not look like someone who frightened easily. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was even and low, and she meant it without performance. I had perhaps 3 minutes left on that road. "You are from Fenwick." "I was passing through Fenwick. I am from nowhere particular." She paused, as if testing whether that answer would cause offense. "I am a herbalist. I travel. I sell medicines to the valley packs and the border settlements. My name is Lyra." A herbalist, a wanderer. No pack name, no pack bond, no territory. In another life I would have found that unsettling. A woman with no house and no tie was either very free or very lost, and in my experience it was difficult to tell which. In this life I found I could not locate the energy to be unsettling about it. "You will stay until the storm lifts," I said. It was not a question, and she did not treat it as one. "My housekeeper will find you dry clothes and a room. The pale fall runs 3 nights at minimum. You will not be on any road until it passes." "I understand. I will not be in your way." She said it simply, and I believed her. I turned to find Marit, my housekeeper, already in the corridor behind me. She had a way of appearing precisely when needed that I had long since ceased questioning. "The east guest room," I said, "and something warm to eat. Her things will need to dry." Marit nodded, already ushering Lyra away down the corridor, and I turned back toward the main hall. I told myself I had done what any lord of this keep would do. I told myself she would eat, sleep, and wait out the storm in the east guest room, and I would barely see her before the road cleared. I was wrong about that within the hour. It was Sale who changed everything. He always was the most disruptive member of my household. Sale was the oldest of my wolves, a great gray and silver male who had been with me since before my first Luna's time, since before Ashenvale's gates had last opened freely to the world. He was enormous even by northern wolf standards, with a jaw that could shatter bone and eyes the pale amber of winter ice, and in the 3 years since Myra's death he had done approximately as I had done. He had withdrawn. He ate when food was brought to him, he walked the inner yard on his own schedule, and he permitted no one to touch him. My younger wolves followed his lead, as wolves always do, and so the whole pack had gone quiet and careful and distant, and I had not tried to change it because I understood it completely. 3 days before the pale fall began, Sale had taken a wound in the forest below the keep. I did not know from what, perhaps a hunting accident, perhaps a territorial skirmish with a mountain cat. I had found him dragging his left hindquarter when he came to the inner gate. My pack healers had cleaned and bound the wound, but it was deep, and in the cold of the keep, it was not mending as it should. He had been lying in the great hall near the central hearth for 3 days, and the fever had been climbing since the morning. I was sitting with him when she found us. I had come to the great hall after leaving her with Merritt, intending to spend the evening with paperwork, the keep's accounts, the winter supply tallies, the sort of work I did not particularly want to do but which gave my hands something to occupy them. Instead, I had sat down on the floor beside Sale, as I sometimes did in the evenings, and put my hand on his great gray flank and felt the heat there. Too much heat. The door at the far end of the hall opened and Lyra came in, already changed into dry clothes. One of the keep's spare wool tunics, several sizes too large, belted at her waist, carrying a cup of something Merritt had given her. She stopped when she saw me on the floor beside the wolf, and she looked at Sale, and I watched her face change. Not with fear, not with the careful wariness most visitors showed when they encountered a northern pack wolf at rest. She looked at Sale the way someone looks at a familiar problem, assessing, attentive, already thinking. "He is running a fever," she said. "Yes." "How long has the wound been open?" 3 days, my men cleaned it." She came closer. I did not stop her, though I was aware that I should probably have said something cautionary about Sale's disposition with strangers. I watched her cross the hall without hesitation, set her cup on the hearthstone, and crouch down beside the wolf at a distance of perhaps 3 feet, and then she waited. She did not reach for him. She did not make any of the noises people make when they are trying to soothe an animal. She simply crouched there and waited, calm as stone, her hands open and resting on her knees, and she looked at the wound and not at the wolf's face. Sale opened his eyes. He had been half asleep or something worse than sleep, the heavy, heat-laden stillness of a body fighting infection. But he opened his eyes and looked at her, and his nostrils moved. The great wolf made a sound I had not heard from him in 3 years. Low, not threatening, the opposite of threatening. Something between acknowledgement and relief, the sound a wolf makes when it recognizes something it has been waiting for without knowing it was waiting. He put his chin on the flagstones, and he looked at her, and he did not move away. I felt something shift behind my sternum, not in my body exactly, but in the part of me that had been a wolf-bonded alpha king for 15 years. Something I had not felt in 3 years, something I had honestly believed I was finished feeling. It moved like a compass needle moved, a small, certain swing toward true north. I said nothing. Lyra reached out then, slowly, and laid her hand on Sale's shoulder just forward of the wound, and Sale closed his eyes again. He exhaled, long and deep and deliberate, the way a wolf exhales when it trusts completely. From the corridor, from the stables, from the sleeping quarters in the east wing, I heard the sounds I always heard in the evening, the small shuffles and shifts of 12 wolves finding their positions for the night. And then, one by one, those sounds changed. There were footsteps in the corridor, quiet, four-footed, and deliberate. The hall doors, which were not fully latched, swung open. They came in one at a time. Vale, the young copper-furred male who had been sleeping in the stable since summer. Wren and her sister Os, the gray females who kept to the east wing and had not entered the great hall in months. Old Dunn, who was nearly Sale's age and walked slowly now but walked nonetheless. 3 of the younger wolves, then 2 more, then the last 3, every wolf in the keep. They did not approach her in a rush. They came to the edges of the room and they settled, sat, or lay down, or stood very still, and every amber eye in that room was on Lyra. 12 wolves. All of them turned toward her at once, in the same moment, like compass needles all swinging to the same north. I had never seen them do that. In 15 years as Alpha King of Ashenvale, in every campaign and every ceremony and every quiet night in this hall, I had never seen my pack do that. I had never seen 12 separate animals with their own rankings and their own grievances and their own particular grudges against the world, move as a single, soundless thing toward one point of attention, as if the point of attention was simply where all of them had always been headed. I am not a man who believes easily in signs. I was raised on the old lore, as every Alpha King is, and I know the stories of destined bonds and fated mates, and the ways the pack-born sense what ordinary perception misses. I believed in those stories the way a man believes in the foundations of his house. They held everything up, and he did not think about them often. But in 3 years of sealed gates and quiet grief, I had stopped expecting the stories to move. In the great hall in the firelight, with the pale fall hissing at the shutters, I felt the stories move. Lyra looked around the room slowly, at the gathered wolves, and then she looked at me. There was no alarm in her face. Something else, a quiet wonder, as if she was the one who had just been surprised by something she could not explain, as if she had been looking for a problem and found herself inside an answer instead. "They are very beautiful," she said softly. I had to look away for a moment. I did not want her to see my face. "Yes," I said. "They are." What I did not say, because it was the first night and she was a stranger, and because 3 years of silence had made me careful with the things that were true, that my pack had not come together into a single room, voluntarily, in 3 years. That Vale had never let a person touch his ears before. That Sale had not made that sound, that low, relieved, recognizing sound, since the last evening of Myra's life, when she had been too weak to leave her chamber and he had gone to her door and pressed his great nose to the gap at the bottom and stayed there all night. I said none of this. I picked up my pen and my useless papers and I set them aside and I stayed. I should have gone to my study. I should have left her to Merritt's care and the wolves, to whatever strange instinct had moved them, and I should have put distance between myself and the warmth of the great hall, and the odd, live thing the evening had become. Instead, I stayed. She had a traveling pack with her. They had brought it in from the outer gate before sealing up, and from it she produced a case of small, well-organized packets and bottles that she went through with the businesslike attention of someone who has been doing this for years. She spoke quietly as she worked, not performing for me but simply explaining, the way a capable person explains a task to someone nearby who might be useful. "The wound is septic at the edges," she said, "but not deeply. It has not reached the bone. Whatever your men used to clean it was correct but not enough. There is a root preparation from the high meadows above Fenwick that draws the corruption out of a deep wound more thoroughly. I have some with me." She glanced up at me. "With your permission." "You have it," I said. She cleaned the wound again with a patience that made my chest ache. Sale bore it without flinching, which told me everything I needed to know about the degree of trust he had extended to this stranger in the space of 20 minutes. She packed the wound with the root preparation and bound it freshly, and all the while the wolves stayed in the hall, watching, and the fire burned down, and the pale fall hissed softly against the iron-banded shutters, and outside the world turned gray and white and dead. "Has he eaten today?" she asked. "Not since this morning." "He will eat tonight," she said it with certainty. "He is not far gone, he was waiting." I watched her hands. They were careful and sure, not the hands of someone who had learned from books, but of someone who had learned from years of kneeling in difficult conditions beside difficult patients. There was a callus on her right palm from some tool she used regularly. Her fingernails were short and clean. She moved around the great wolf without any of the excess motion of nervousness, and Sale tracked her with his eyes in the way of a wolf who has decided to trust, which is absolute. "How long have you traveled?" I asked, because I wanted to hear her voice again, and that was the question I arrived at. 6 years. Since I was 19. She pressed the new binding gently and sat back. "My mother was a healer. She died when I was 18. I spent a year in our village trying to keep her practice and finding that I needed more medicines, more knowledge, more cases than one village could give me. So I left. Alone. I prefer it. I make my own decisions and answer to no one's pack politics." A small, dry smile. "I have occasionally been told that this is very unusual for a woman without a pack bond." "It is," I said, "though unusual is not the same as wrong." She looked at me then, a direct look, the kind she had given me in the corridor, unguarded and assessing. "No," she said quietly. "It is not." That first night the storm closed in fully, and the pale fall became something other than a weather event. It became a presence. The keep groaned in it, not structurally, nothing so dramatic, but the stone itself seemed to absorb the wrongness of the falling mist and give back a chill that was different from ordinary cold. I had lived in Ashenvale for 15 years, and I had never felt the walls that way. Lyra sat by the fire with Sale's great head against her knee and talked with my housekeeper Merritt, who was not, as a rule, a talkative woman. Merritt had served my family for 30 years, had managed this keep through my first Luna's illness and death and the long silence after, and had the particular efficiency of someone who had weathered everything and come out practical on the other side. She and Lyra fell into conversation with the ease of two people who respect each other's competence, and I sat at the far end of the long table with my tallies and my accounts, and I did not do a single calculation all evening. I watched instead. I watched Lyra speak to Merritt about the border settlements and the herbs that grew in the high passes, about the winter preparations of the valley packs and the illnesses she had treated in the last season. I watched her stroke Sale's fur in the absent-minded, steady way of someone who has always been comfortable with large animals. I watched old Dunn shuffle across the hall and lie down on Lyra's other side, and I watched her simply accept this without surprise, as if large old wolves lying beside her was the most ordinary thing in the world. At some point in the evening my youngest wolves, the 3 who had joined the pack in the year after Myra's death, and had never really known what a fully open, fully alive Ashenvale felt like, crept close enough to be within arm's reach of her. They did not ask to be petted. They simply got close and settled, looking at her with the focused amber attention of wolves who have decided something without knowing what they have decided. She reached out and scratched behind the ear of the nearest one, the young copper male, Vale, and his tail moved. Not the frantic wag of a pup, but the slow, certain movement of a wolf whose dignity remains intact while something inside it softens. I turned back to my papers. The number I kept writing was not from any account. It was 15, the number of years it had been since I first understood what it meant to have a fated mate, and 3, the number of years it had been since I decided I would not understand it again. Both of those numbers felt less certain than they had this morning. The second day of the pale fall, I made the mistake of helping her. She had asked Merritt for access to the keep's herb stores. Ashenvale kept a reasonable supply, maintained for the pack's healers, and I met her in the storeroom at mid-morning entirely by accident. I had come to take inventory of the winter grain and found her standing on the lower shelf step, her back to the door, reaching for the upper shelves with the focused expression of someone solving a problem. "The Wild Heath bundle," she said without turning around. She must have heard my step. "Second shelf from the top, third from the left." I looked, found the bundle, handed it down. "Thank you." She examined it, nodded, added it to the collection in her arms. "Your stores are better than I expected for a keep that has been sealed for 3 years. My housekeeper is thorough." "She is." Lyra stepped down from the shelf step, redistributed her armload, and looked around the storeroom with the appraising attention she seemed to give everything. "You have enough here to supplement sales treatment for another 2 days. The fever should be fully broken by the second night if we keep the wound clean. He is stronger than he looked when I first came in." "He is the strongest wolf I have known," I said, "but he has not been well since." I stopped. She did not push. She turned to examine a row of dried preparations and gave me the space of a silence that did not demand to be filled. That was a skill I recognized. A genuine one, learned the same way her hands had learned their work, from years of being with people who were carrying something heavy. "Since your Luna died," she said gently to the shelf, "not a question." The whole keep knew, half the mountain knew. I did not know how she had come by it. Perhaps Merritt had said something. Perhaps it was simply the kind of thing that traveled in village talk the way seeds traveled in wind. "Yes," I said. "I am sorry," still to the shelf, still giving me the space of not being looked at while I answered. "The wolves feel grief the way people do, I have found. More honestly sometimes." I thought of Sale, lying motionless in the great hall for 3 days with his wound unhealed, not fighting the infection with any of the urgency I had expected from the strongest wolf I knew. I thought of the other wolves, retreated and quiet, going through the motions of a pack that had lost the thing that made it a pack. "Yes," I said again. She turned around then, her arms full of bundles, and looked at me with the direct, careful look I was coming to recognize as simply the way she looked at things that mattered. "He is healing now," she said. She meant Sale. She also, I thought, meant something more than Sale. She did not say the second thing aloud, and I did not address it, and we walked back to the great hall in a silence that was entirely comfortable. That afternoon I found myself in the great hall again, for no reason I could have justified to anyone who asked. Lyra had set up a kind of small working space near the fire, her case, a few of the storeroom preparations, the materials she needed for Sale's treatment. She worked through them with the orderly focus she brought to everything, and the wolves lay nearby in the warmth, and outside the pale fall hissed against the shuttered world, and I sat in the chair I had not sat in for 3 years, Myra's chair, the one at the head of the table nearest the fire, and I sat in it because it was the closest chair to where Lyra was working. I had not sat in that chair since Myra died. I did not comment on this. Neither did Lyra. Neither did Merritt, who came through once and saw me in it, and whose expression flickered with something she did not put into words. "Tell me about the mountain road from Fenwick," I said, because I wanted to hear about the world I had not entered for 3 years. She told me. She told it well, not the dramatic version but the real version, the texture of moving through valley packs in winter with a herbalist's case and a horse who had strong opinions about stream crossings. She described the border settlements in the east with the fond particularity of someone who had spent enough time there to know people, not just places. She told me about a woman in a settlement called Grayville who had been sick for 2 winters with something no pack healer had identified, and how Lyra had spent 4 days there, and found it was the moss on the walls of the woman's sleeping room that was doing it, a particular kind of mountain moss that was harmless in summer, but in winter produced a vapor in closed spaces that accumulated in the lungs. She was better within a week of moving into a different room, Lyra said. 4 years of illness, and the answer was 4 feet of moss on a wall. You saved her life. I moved her to a different room. The difference matters. I looked at her. Why does it matter? She was quiet for a moment, smoothing the fresh binding over Sale's wound. Sale's great eyes half closed and patient beneath her hands. Because if I say I saved her life, the story becomes about me, she said. She survived. Her body healed. I found the thing that was in the way. The saving was hers. A pause. I find healers who believe they are the heroes of their patients' stories often miss things. They are looking for heroic problems. I thought of that for a long time after she said it. The afternoon stretched and the light through the clear story went from white to gold, and Sale slept, and the wolves kept their quiet positions in the room, and the pale fall continued its patient work against the shuttered world. I found that I was not doing my accounts. I was watching the fire and thinking about a healer in a settlement called Grayville who had been sick for 4 years, and recovered when someone moved her to a different room, and about the difference between saving a life and removing an obstruction. I had been, I thought, an obstruction. To my pack, to my keep, to the people in it who needed a lord who was present rather than a lord who was maintained. I had been a wall I had built to hold myself in and had told myself it was holding the cold out. There was a difference, and I was only now, sitting across from someone who made every difference plainly visible, beginning to see it. Lyra came in from checking the stores with a clean set of bindings for Sale's evening treatment, and found me still in Myra's chair with the accounts flat and unread before me. She glanced at the accounts, glanced at me, and said nothing about either. She went to Sale and began the evening binding, and Vale came over and pushed his nose against her arm in the shameless way he had been doing all afternoon, and she let him without comment, and the hall was quiet and warm, and entirely unlike the hall of the past 3 years. Merritt told me, she said, as she worked, that the lower village has been sending up fewer supply wagons than they used to. Yes, I said, because they are not certain of their welcome. I did not immediately answer. They are not wrong to be uncertain, she said, not unkindly. A keep with sealed gates and an alpha who doesn't come to the gate himself does not send a clear signal. A pause. I am not criticizing. I am saying what I observe. You are criticizing. She looked up. The corner of her mouth moved. A little, she admitted, with the best intentions. I thought of the lower village, the farmers and the small traders who had been coming up the mountain road to Ashenvale for 30 years, who had depended on the keep's trade and its medical stores, and its legal standing the way settlements always depended on their alpha household, and who had been sending smaller wagons with more hesitation for 3 years, because I had given them no reason to do otherwise. I have not been a good lord this past while, I said. No, she agreed, simply and without cruelty. But you are beginning to be again. That is what matters. She pressed the fresh binding into place, and Sale sighed with the deep satisfaction of an animal whose pain has been attended to. And outside the storm continued, and I sat in the chair by the fire and felt, against everything I had expected, the specific warmth of being told the truth by someone who meant you well. The second evening was quieter, and warmer and more dangerous. Dangerous is not the right word. Nothing happened. That is the point, nothing happened. And yet by the time the fire had burned low and Merritt had gone to her room, and the wolves were settled, and Lyra was sitting in the chair across from me with a cup of tea cooling in her hands, I was aware that I was in entirely uncharted territory. I had not spent an evening like this in 3 years. I had not sat across from someone and talked, not the exchange of reports that I had with Torvel or the household necessities that I managed with Merritt, but actual conversation, the kind that builds something over its own duration, in 3 years. It was not dramatic. We talked about medicines, about the history of the northern packs, about the pale fall and what the old keepers believed caused it. She knew more about the old lore than I would have expected from someone with no pack affiliation. She had read, extensively, she said, in every pack library that would admit her, which was not all of them. They do not always admit a woman with no pack bond, I asked. Some do not admit a woman at all. Some do not admit wanderers. I have found that arriving in the middle of a difficult situation, a sick pack leader, an outbreak of river fever, a wolf no one can settle, is an effective way of obtaining access to things that would otherwise be withheld. She smiled. Not that I arrange difficult situations. Only benefit from them. Only benefit from them. And then she said, Ashenvale's library is very fine. I noticed it from the corridor. You are welcome to use it, I said, for as long as you are here. I said it before I knew I had decided it. She looked at me carefully. That is generous. You have put sail on the road to recovery and fed my entire pack better than my own kitchen staff have managed in 6 months. The library is a small thing. Your kitchen staff work very hard. They do. I have been a poor employer for 3 years. I heard myself say it, and it landed heavily in the warm air of the hall, more honest than I had intended. I have not been present in the way a lord of a keep should be. I have kept the walls in repair and the stores filled and the wolves fed. The rest I have not attended to as I should. Lyra did not rush to reassure me. She looked at her cooling tea, and she was quiet for a moment. Grief takes the time it takes, she said at last. It does not cooperate with the schedules of keeps or packs or anything else, but it does not last forever, even when it feels as though it will. You lost your mother. Yes, soft and even. And my pack, when I was 10, a fever that came through the valley and took most of the able-bodied adults, and a man I thought I would spend my life with when I was 22, who decided he preferred certainty to someone who was always on the road. A small pause. I have learned that what feels like the end is often only the point at which the road bends, and you cannot yet see what is around it. You believe that? I have evidence for it. Her eyes met mine across the fire. I am sitting here. I looked at her for a moment longer than was necessary. Then I looked at the fire. Outside, the pale fall continued. The night continued. And I sat in a chair I had not sat in for 3 years and felt, against everything I had expected to feel, entirely at home. Sale's fever broke at dawn of the 3rd day. I heard Lyra from across the hall. She had been checking on him in the early hours, as she had done each night, and I heard the change in her voice when she called softly for Merritt. The warmth in it, the particular warmth of someone who has been monitoring a crisis and has just seen it resolve. I was dressed and in the hall within minutes. No good reason for it except that I was. Sale was on his feet. Unsteady, his injured leg still carried carefully, but on his feet, and when I came into the hall he turned his head toward me and his tail moved, slow and definite. He had not moved his tail in 3 years. Not once. Not in any of the evenings I had sat with him on the floor of this hall and told him things I could not tell anyone else. Lyra was crouching beside him, her hand on his shoulder, and she was watching me. She was watching my face when I saw Sale's tail move, and she saw what happened to it, and to her credit, she said nothing. She simply watched, and the warmth in her face was quiet and private and not at all the warmth of someone who expects to be thanked. He will walk today, she said, slowly and not far. But he will walk. Sale crossed the hall on his own 3 legs and one careful 4th, and he came to me, and he put his great gray head against my chest the way he had not done since the last night of Myra's life. And I put my hand on his neck, and I stood there for a long moment, and I did not try to keep my face in order. When I looked up, Lyra had turned away to give me the privacy of the moment. She was tidying her working space, her back to me, as if she had simply found something else to attend to. I had never been given privacy more gracefully. The 3rd day had a different quality than the 2 before it. The pale fall was lessening, the mist thinner through the shutters, the hissing of it against the stone walls losing its pressure. Torvel reported at midday that the outer yard was clear, and the lower road was showing again through the valley floor, still gray-pale from the residue but passable. By the third evening, he said, the road to Fenwick would be fully open. I knew this and did not mention it to Lyra. This was not a deception. She knew the storm schedule as well as I did. She had been watching the sky through the great hall's high clear-story windows all day. But I did not raise the subject of her departure, and she did not raise it, and we spent the third day in a way I had not spent a day in Ashenvale for 3 years. She came with me on my inspection of the keep. The morning round of walls and stores and stables that I did every day but had come to do in a kind of silence, alone, going through the motions because the motions needed going through and not for any other reason. She did not ask to join me. She simply appeared beside me when I left the hall, and I said nothing, and we went together. She noticed things. She noticed the section of the east wing where the supply of certain dried herbs had been allowed to run down. She named 3 things that a pack healer would want in winter that Ashenvale stores did not have. She noticed the young wolf Vale's off-gate in the stable yard, and crouched to examine his right front pad, and found a stone fragment lodged there that no one had seen. She noticed the junior kitchen worker, a young man named Bren, standing at the edge of the storage corridor with the careful stillness of someone trying not to be noticed while something hurt. And she stopped and asked him directly what was wrong, and it turned out he had been carrying a chest infection for 2 weeks, and had said nothing because he did not want to be trouble. "You are not trouble," she told Bren, in the corridor outside the kitchen with the matter-of-fact warmth that seemed to be her natural register. "You are someone who is ill, and that is what healers are for." She turned to me. "Do you have honey and dried thyme in the stores?" "We do." "And a steam pot?" "Yes." "Good." He needs 3 days of rest and a steam preparation twice daily, and something to tell his Wolf-Frank supervisor that a chest infection is not voluntary shirking. She glanced at me. "Perhaps from you, my lord, that message would carry weight." I looked at Bren, who was young and embarrassed and clearly relieved. 3 days of rest," I said. "Report to Merritt for the preparation. Bren," he looked up, "you should have said something sooner." "Yes, my lord, I'm sorry, my lord." "Don't apologize, just rest." I heard Lyra make a small sound behind me as we walked away, not quite a laugh, something warmer than that. When I glanced at her, she was looking at the corridor floor with the corner of her mouth turned up. "What?" I asked. "Nothing." A pause. "You are not as sealed as you think you are." I said nothing to that because I did not have anything to say to it that would have been honest and also comfortable. That afternoon, for the first time since Myra's death, I took Sale into the inner yard. He needed the air and the movement, careful, supervised, not far. But the inner yard was sheltered from any residual drift of the pale fall, walled on all sides, and the sky above it was beginning to show clear for the first time in 3 days. I walked him slow circuits of the yard, his large body warm against my leg, his injured foot placed with the careful deliberation of an animal that knows its limits and respects them. Lyra came into the yard after the 3rd circuit, and Sale turned toward her immediately, not leaving my side but turning his head with the tracking attention of an animal who has decided someone belongs within his range of awareness. She came and walked on his other side, matching our slow pace without comment, and the 3 of us made 2 more circuits of the yard in the afternoon light while the sky went from pale to blue, and the last of the storm died out over the northern peaks. "The road will be clear by morning," she said. "Torval says so." "Then I should think about what time to leave." She said it simply and practically, the way she said most things. "If I start at first light, I can reach Fenwick before the evening cold sets in. I'll need to find a replacement horse or a cart. Mine is certainly gone." "I will arrange a horse," I said. "A sound one, not a mount that will bolt at weather." "Thank you, I can pay." "No." I said it without particular emphasis, just as a settled fact. She looked at me sideways. "You are very certain about that?" You healed my oldest wolf and noticed a chest infection in my staff, and found a stone fragment in my young wolf's pad that my own stable hands missed. A horse is a very inadequate exchange." She looked ahead at the far wall of the inner yard, and for a moment she was quiet with the particular quality she had of being quiet, not empty, but full, as if there was something she was deciding whether to say. "It has been a strange few days," she said at last. "Yes. I am sorry for arriving in your keep without warning and upending the quiet of it." "You did not upend it. I heard myself say it, and it was entirely true. You changed the quality of it. That is not the same thing." She stopped walking. Sale stopped beside her, and after a step I stopped too, and we stood in the middle of the inner yard in the afternoon light with the sky clear and blue above us, and the storm entirely gone. "What was she like?" Lyra asked. "Your Luna?" It was a question no one in Ashenvale had asked me in 3 years. No one had dared, or thought it kind, or known how to make it anything other than an intrusion. She asked it with the same directness and the same care with which she did everything, as if the question was simply a legitimate thing to want to know, and she trusted that I could bear it. I was quiet for a moment. "She was nothing like you," I said. "She was loud in a way, full of laughter. She filled a room without trying, and she was angry at injustice in a way that took no prisoners, and she loved the pack with every part of her, and she was ill for 2 years before she died, and she did not slow down for a single day of it." I paused. "She was extraordinary." Lyra nodded. "She sounds it." "She would have liked you," I said, and was surprised to find this was something I believed completely. "She would have liked someone who moves through the world as though she owes it honesty." Lyra looked at me then straight on in the clear afternoon light, and whatever she saw in my face she sat with carefully, the way she sat with difficult things. Her eyes were dark brown, I noticed, the color of good deep soil in early spring. "I should begin packing my case tonight," she said quietly. "Yes," I said, "I suppose you should." Neither of us moved. She did not go to bed early that last evening. Neither did I. We sat in the great hall with the fire high and the wolves settled around us in the warmth, and Merritt brought food and then quietly removed herself, and we talked until the fire had burned down to coals and the hall was warm and golden and very still. We talked about her mother and what she had been like, a woman of great practical knowledge and equal stubbornness, who had insisted that her daughter learn every preparation twice, once correctly and once with the ingredient missing, so that the absence of it was as familiar as the presence. We talked about the northern packs and their histories, which I knew from the inside and she knew from reading and from years of arriving on their doorsteps with medicines. We talked about what made a good pack strong, not the size of it, she said, but the quality of its attentiveness to its own. A pack that noticed its members was a pack that could endure anything. "Like a good keep," I said. "Yes," she looked at me across the fire. "Like a good keep." I thought of Bren in the corridor, carrying his chest infection in silence for 2 weeks because he had not wanted to be trouble. I thought of the wolves retreating into their separate corners for 3 years because the pack's center had gone still and given them no signal to do otherwise. I thought of the stores running low on 3 things a pack healer would need, because I had been going through the motions and not actually attending. "I have not been very attentive," I said. "You have been grieving." "They are not mutually exclusive." She considered this. "No," she said, "they are not." "I have been," I said slowly, "behaving as if the keep and the pack were a form of waiting, as if I was maintaining them until I could decide what I was maintaining them for. And I have not decided, I have simply waited." The fire shifted in the grate. Sale, lying beside my chair now, exhaled in the slow, deliberate way that had come back to him since the fever broke, the breath of a wolf that is not troubled. "What would you be maintaining them for if you decided?" Lyra asked. She asked it gently, as a real question, not a theoretical one. I looked at her. She held the look steadily, her hands around her cooling cup, the firelight warm on her face. I had an answer. It arrived in me the way the compass needle had moved, not dramatically, not with any of the force of the stories about fated bonds that I had heard all my life, but simply, certain, a small, clear swing to true north. I did not say it. It was the third night of the storm, and she was leaving in the morning, and it was not the moment for certainties. I had not yet earned the right to speak aloud. I don't know, I said instead, which was not entirely true. I think I am beginning to. She looked at me a moment longer, and then she looked at the fire, and the warmth in her face was very quiet and very private and not quite hidden. Good, she said softly. She began packing her case before dawn. I knew because I was awake before dawn. I had not slept well, or much, which was not something that had happened to me in 3 years. 3 years of the heavy, dreamless sleep of someone who has stopped expecting anything from the night. I lay in the dark of my chamber and listened to the quiet sounds of the keep, and felt the strange aliveness of being awake at this hour and minding it. I was in the great hall when Lyra came down with her packed case, her cloak dry and brushed, her traveling clothes back in order. She looked as she had looked when she arrived, except that she was not soaked and half frozen, and there was something in her face that had not been there at the gate, something settled, as if she had been somewhere long enough to feel the place in her bones. Torval says the horse is ready, she said. Yes. Marit had already laid out breakfast, more than Lyra could eat before a morning ride, more than was strictly necessary, which was Marit's way of saying something she would not say in words. Lyra ate and thanked her, and Marit said it was nothing, and both of them knew it was not nothing at all. I walked her to the inner gate. Sale came with us, his injured leg still carried with care but his pace better than the day before, his tail moving in the slow, deliberate way it had remembered. The horse Torval had prepared was a steady dark bay, mountain-bred, not a horse that would spook at weather. Lyra's case was strapped to the saddle. The morning was clear and cold, and the sky above the peaks was the particular pale blue that came after a great storm had spent itself entirely. She checked the case buckles, checked the girth, ran her hand along the horse's neck in the accustomed way of someone who has spent years managing her own transport and trusts no one else's judgment about it. Then she turned to me. Thank you, she said, for the shelter and the library and the kitchen staff who fed me better than I have eaten in 2 months on the road. Thank you, I said, for Sale. She looked at Sale, who was sitting at my left side and watching her with the steady amber attention of an animal that has made a permanent decision about a person. She looked at him for a moment with the quiet warmth she had given him from the first hour, and then she looked at me. He will be well, she said. Change the binding every 2 days for another week. The root preparation is in the left side pocket of your storeroom, I labeled it. A pause. If the wound reopens, send for me. I winter in Fenwick most years. The pack healer there knows where to find me. I will, I said. She took the reins. The horse turned toward the gate and the clear road and the world below the mountain, and she had 1 foot in the stirrup. Sale crossed the yard. He moved at a walk, careful, deliberate, favoring his injured leg, and he came to the gate arch and he sat down in the middle of it, directly beneath the stone, directly across the path that led to the road. He sat down and he looked at Lyra. He did not bare his teeth. He did not growl. He simply sat in the gate arch with the complete, immovable certainty of a wolf who has made a decision, and he looked at her. The horse stopped. Lyra looked down at Sale. Sale looked up at her. From behind them, from the hall and the stable yard in the east wing, I heard the 4-footed sounds of wolves. Vale came first, trotting from the stable yard to the gate arch and sitting down beside Sale. Wren and As, the Grey sisters, came from the corridor at a steady walk and sat on the other side. One by one, until every wolf in Ashenvale's pack was sitting in the gate arch or along the gate wall, a long silent line of amber eyes and patient, certain faces. 12 wolves, not one of them moving. Lyra sat on the horse and looked at them, and I watched her face, the quiet astonishment of it, and then, underneath the astonishment, something slower and warmer. She looked at the wolves for a long moment. Then she looked at me. I had not planned what to say. I was not a man who was good at the things that needed to be said at moments like this one. I was a man who kept walls in repair and stores filled, and I had not tried to say anything genuinely difficult in 3 years. "I know you travel," I said. "I know you prefer it. I know you have no pack bond, and you made that choice deliberately, and it is the right choice for the life you have built." I stopped, began again. "I am not asking you to give any of that up. I am asking you to consider whether Ashenvale might be a place you return to, whether the library might be available to you, whether the stores that are running low on 3 things a pack healer would want might benefit from someone who knows what those things are." I paused. "Whether Sale might benefit from someone checking his wound in 10 days. She looked at me for a long moment in the pale morning light. "That is a very practical argument," she said. "I am a practical man. You are not entirely a practical man." I said nothing. I had run out of the kind of words that keep things at a safe distance. She looked at Sale and the gate arch, sitting patient and certain and entirely unashamed of blocking a road. She looked at the 12 wolves. She looked at me. Then she took her foot out of the stirrup. She passed the reins to Torvel, who took them with the careful expression of a man who is trying very hard not to look like he had expected this, and she walked back into the inner yard and stood before me with her traveling case over her shoulder. 10 days, she said, for the wound. 10 days, I agreed. And then we discussed the rest. Yes. Sale got up from the gate arch and walked back across the yard to us, and when he reached her, he pushed his great gray head against her hip with the easy familiarity of a wolf who has decided on a permanent arrangement. She put her hand in his fur. The other wolves came in from the gate one by one, flowing back through the yard and the hall corridor, no longer blocking the road but no longer concerned about it either. We stood in the inner yard in the clear morning light, the storm gone and the sky open and the world below the mountain going about its ordinary business, and I did not feel like a man who was maintaining a keep and waiting for a reason. I felt like a man who had just been handed one. "Come inside," I said. "Merritt put out too much breakfast for one person." "She did it on purpose," Lyra said. "She did everything on purpose. She always does." We went inside, and Sale came with us, and the great hall was warm in the morning light, and outside the mountain road was clear and open and going nowhere we needed to be. That was 3 years ago. The library is better stocked than it was. She added 2 full shelves of herbalist and naturalist texts in the first year. Sourced from pack libraries, she had spent 6 years building relationships with. And I added an entire section on northern wolf lore in the second year, because she had gone through the existing section in 3 months and wanted more. We have argued with great enjoyment about whether the northern binding style is more durable than the eastern, and I have always been wrong, and she has always been right, and we have both enjoyed this very much. The stores have not run low on anything a healer would want in 3 winters, because the person who knows what those things are checks them in the last week of every month, between the end of her clinic hours with the valley packs she visits, and the evening meal she has taken to making herself when the mood strikes her, which is to say most evenings. The lower village sends full wagons again. The pack healers come to her with the difficult cases, and she never turns one away. She made a friend of the Fenwick market's most disagreeable spice trader, and now we have spices in the kitchen that were not there before, and Bren has become something of an artist with them. Bren is now my head kitchen worker, and his chest never troubles him in winter anymore. Vale has grown into the finest young wolf in Ashenvale's pack, larger even than I expected, with a copper coat that goes almost red in summer light, and a shameless habit of seeking Lyra out whenever she is in the keep, pushing his nose into her hand with the absolute lack of dignity of an animal who got what he wanted and has no intention of pretending otherwise. Ren and Os, the Grey sisters, sleep at the foot of our bed in winter, which I did not plan and have come to find entirely natural. Old Dunn passed quietly in his sleep last spring, and Lyra sat with him at the end, and the pack mourned him together, which was more than we had given ourselves permission to do for anything in the years before she came. There is a stone for him in the inner yard, which was my idea, and a small wild heath plant growing beside it, which was hers, and which blooms in the cold months with the stubbornness of something that refuses to believe winter is definitive. Sale's leg healed entirely. He walks without a trace of the old carry now, and in the evenings he sleeps in the great hall with his head in Lyra's lap and his amber eyes half closed, as if he has always slept this way and cannot imagine why he would do otherwise. He is the oldest wolf in the pack, and he knows it, and he carries the dignity of it without effort. He is also, as far as I can determine, the smuggest wolf in the north, because he was right before any of the rest of us knew what we were deciding. The gates of Ashenvale are open now. Not every hour and not to everyone. I am a cautious man, and that is not a quality I expect to shed, but they open. They open on market days and on the days when the valley packs have need of the keep's resources, and they open on the days when Lyra has told me she has patients coming from the border settlements who have nowhere else to go, and they open now the way a keep's gates ought to open, because the life inside them is alive enough to share. I did not seal myself again after Myra's death. I did not stop grieving her, either. That is not how it works, as Lyra told me on the third night of the Pale Fall, and she was right about that, as she is about most things, though I have learned not to admit it without some deliberation, because she finds my deliberations amusing. But grief is not a wall. It is a country you live in and learn the borders of, and the borders of it, I found, were wider than I had thought. Wide enough to hold everything I had been, and everything I was becoming in her. We stood in the great hall on the morning I gave her my mark, the midwinter morning when the pack had gathered and the old rite had been said in the words it had always been said, and Sale had sat exactly where he had sat in the gate arch on the morning. I had almost let her ride away, patient and unashamed and occupying a great deal of space, and I looked at the mark on her wrist, the blue silver that was the color of Ashenvale's bond line, and I thought of a compass needle swinging to north. Not a fire, not a storm. A compass needle, small and certain, pointing home. She looked up at me and she looked at the mark, and she said quietly, so that only I heard it over the sound of the assembled pack and the morning light on the stone and the wolves' settled warmth against our legs. Still certain. Since the first night, I said, ask Sale. Sale, at her left side, opened one amber eye and closed it again, and did not move. The whole pack knew his opinion on the subject. The whole pack had known it since the night of the storm, when he had put his chin on the flagstones and exhaled like a wolf who has found the thing he was looking for, and has decided, with the complete and irrevocable certainty available only to wolves, that this is where the searching ends. Lyra looked at me with the direct, warm, honest look that I had fallen in love with on a stormy evening in a great hall full of wolves, and she laughed, soft and genuine and entirely her own, and she took my hand. Outside, the winter was clear and cold and very bright, and the mountain road ran down to the valley where the world was, open in every direction. I have never needed to seal those gates again.